Today, we're going to talk about navigating all of Microsoft's agent surfaces. I want to make sure that it's actionable and that we have a lot of interactivity. So please feel free to put comments in the chat. If you have any questions, I'll try to get to them if I can see them. But with that, let's go ahead and get started. So today, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about just a quick map of all the different agent building surfaces, or just agent surfaces in general. We're going to talk about a decision model on how to choose. We're also going to talk about how you can compose these different agent surfaces, because not everything follows a standard workflow. And then we're going to talk about cost, fun stuff on licensing and unit economics. And then lastly, we're going to talk about governance and scaling and how you can do cost controls, placement, Agent 365, lots more to come. All right. So the very first thing I would like to start with is the problem, which is choosing intentionally. Microsoft agent landscape is large, and there are so many new agents coming up, so many new capabilities come out every day. Right now, in my opinion, the capability existing is not really the hard part. The hard part is deciding where you want to put your workloads, and then whether your workloads belong in a certain place or not. Cost and governance do shape these decisions more than the technology at the moment, because the capability is everywhere. Right now, there is so many ways you can solve a problem, but the architecture decisions and the cost that follows it, as well as how you can actually track that definitely plays a role and can have a lot of different implications for you. All right, so where can you build an agent? So I'm going to put links at the bottom of the slides on every capability that I mentioned. So once the session is over, I'll share the slides with the MN365 team, and you'll have these links that have citations to where these learn documentation is, and you can follow it, and it can help you quickly get oriented with it. So first of all, the agent builder in M365 Copilot, whether you have a license or not, you can build a declarative agent, and a declarative agent is basically an agent that is following a standard set of system instructions pointed at a specific knowledge source, and maybe has one or two connectors depending on the capability of it. For free users, they can use it for personal productivity. They cannot really share it, but for licensed users, they can share it with other licensed users. However, they cannot share it with unlicensed users. The second surface is Copilot Studio. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen Copilot Studio and interacted with it in some way, shape, or form. The new design for Copilot Studio is awesome, and it simplifies it for makers. However, Copilot Studio is credit metered, meaning that you cannot use it without having some sort of Copilot credit. We'll talk about licensing and how you can access that. But it does allow you a wider range of access to channels, as well as actions, conversation orchestration, and a bunch of other capabilities that you can have. And then lastly, the Microsoft Foundry, which is the pro code where you get full control and customizability for anything. Custom retrieval and orchestration, it uses your Azure consumptions. You deploy Azure resources in the Foundry, and then you pay per tool, per session, etc. Now, this is the product level map, but let's talk about the new synonyms or the new hype terms that we hear. And I like to think of it of this reactive to autonomous scale. The first one is Copilot, and we talked about it. You ask, it answers. Everybody has used Copilot right now. The second piece is Co-work, which went GA in June, and right now it uses Copilot credits. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about when you can use Co-work versus when you can use Copilot. But long story short, Co-work is used when you want to have a multi-step knowledge workflow that takes up a lot of time and a lot of orchestration that does not really fit into the ask and answer. And then lastly, we have a couple of autonomous agents that are coming up. One of them is Autopilot or Microsoft Scout, or Klaba, whatever it is called. It is always on. It has its own identity, and you need a couple of prerequisites to be able to access this. A side mention for GitHub Copilot is for dev work, as well as some of the pre-built agents that ship within a premium M365 Copilot license, which is the researcher and the analyst. They're ready to use. You can orchestrate them by scheduling some prompts. You don't need to have any build, and they are pretty powerful. All right, so this is the scale that I was talking about. The reactive agents, or the ones where you can ask and answer, they're usually lower cost per run, lower accuracy, and lower stakes as well. And some of them, like M365 Copilot, they're primarily seat-based, so you pay the $30 per user per month. And then you can talk to M365 Copilot or the agents in there as much as you want. Some caveats exist for a researcher or analyst. But then as we go up the scale, the more cost per run gets incurred. For co-work, as of July 1st, it uses Copilot credits. Copilot credits are the unified token currency that Microsoft uses. You can buy it in a bunch of different ways, but one of them is the pay-go model. And for simplification, in the pay-go model, one Copilot credit is about a cent. So co-work can be its own topic and conversation. I'm sure next month's session is going to be great with Maddie when she talks about all the different ways that you can use it. And then lastly, for the autonomous, this is where you get to the higher cost per run and higher accuracy. If you ever heard of dev loops, or if you ever heard of agents that run for hours on end, this is where some of these autonomous agent capabilities exist. Right now, they're very popular within coding, but with Microsoft Scout, it's going to extend to more knowledge work as we go forward. All right, so let's talk about how we choose. This is a nice mental model that I'd like to go with. And these, you can think of them as gates. They don't have to be sequential in this same exact sense. However, some of them have a lot more weight to what decides where a workload needs to go, or which agent you need to build, or does it even have to be an agent? And then the caveat that I would like to say is, in the age of AI, we have a very easy tendency to over-engineer things and start throwing AI at a bunch of different capabilities. You don't always need that. Sometimes there are ways that you can avoid spending AI credits, and sometimes there are ways that you can basically limit the consumption that you have by smart engineering patterns. So with that, we're going to go through these build gates, as I like to call them. And then as soon as the build gate succeeds or fails, then you can decide which product or which agent surface to go to. So let's talk about the first one. And this, for me, is the most important surface. The first one is value. If you do not have a clear value proposition or ROI or problem, this just becomes it would be cool to have an agent to do this. And this is a rabbit hole that you don't want to be in, depending on your organization and your time commitments. It's good for exploration, but it's not really good for an enterprise deployment or for actually tracking ROI. So what does this mean? Are we tracking some sort of recurring pain or problem or baseline, whether it be a cost, hours, or touch times, etc.? If there is something like this, then great, you can keep going, and this might fit an agent. If there is no baseline or no defensible ROI, just do not commit to build it. Frame the problem, prototype a throwaway agent. Everybody can do this through M365 Copilot Agent Builder. Establish a baseline you can measure. An example of this is if somebody wants help with a sales agent and they're not really sure what problem they're trying to solve, you can have a conversation with them about, okay, what is some of the most repetitive work that you do? Or what is the most annoying thing that you have to do every day? And then you take it from there, give them some capability to prototype and try to formulate the problem, then start talking about success criteria and value. Let's assume you have a value, you have a clear ROI, you have a limited scope. Then the next piece, and this is one of the most important pieces that you need to focus on, is determinism. Is this a deterministic problem, meaning that you can solve it with rules? Can it be expressed as rules or not? If it can be expressed as rules, you don't need a model. You don't need a language model. Sure, a language model can fit, but as I mentioned here in the slide, it's the least predictable way to run an if statement. It will work 99.999% of the time. There will be this small capability gap where, because of the undeterministic nature of LLMs, it might hallucinate or it might fail. And depending on the workload, that might be catastrophic. So here's where you can tell that you might need an agent or some form of AI capability, because again, AI capabilities don't necessarily have to be an agent. So the tell over here is going to be if you're facing unstructured input, open-ended language, or too many variables that you cannot possibly catch with an if statement or a switch statement. However, if you can express it deterministically, or if you can draw a flowchart, then go ahead and do it. It's still paid, but it is cheaper, it is more predictable, and you are not paying the model to make a decision that you already know how to define. Now, assuming that you know, hey, this is a good use case, this requires a degree of flexibility or unstructured input of an unknown problem space, then you can move to the third piece, which is consumer. Who's going to be seeing this? Who's going to be interacting with this? I'm going to be a lot more flexible if I'm building a B2E or a business to employee agent that is internal, that I get to control a lot of the different capabilities there, than if I am building something that is external that I do not know specifically who the persona that's going to be interacting with is. So neither of them is free. However, depending on what you decide, you're going to figure out what the easiest way forward is. For licensed M365 Copilot user, you get free tenant graph routing, which is WorkIQ. And then you do get a couple of additional features for that. And you still have to pay for premium connectors depending on your platform licensing. However, for internal users, this is truly the easiest path forward. Teams channel or M365 Copilot, you can deploy it to licensed or unlicensed premium Copilot users. However, if you're going to talk about external, everything is going to be metered. A very classic example that happens over here is if you're trying to build a customer service agent, and that customer service agent, for example, can do some actions, answer based on FAQs, and maybe call an API to check, a tracking number. Everything is metered, and you might get some adversarial inputs. People really like to break things as soon as they see them. You might also get abuse where somebody might be just trying to put in as much context as possible in there. They might try to do the refresh on an automated fashion. There's a lot more control that you have to add based on that consumer game. Now, moving forward, on that last piece that we discussed, we have complexity coming up as a kind of a fork in the road that decides where you want to go. So for complexity's sake, there are ways that you can get a very functional working agent that is limited in scope, that does not require a lot of back and forth. For that, those are going to be your declarative agents. Whether an agent builder on Copilot Studio, you're basically allowing a maker to build an agent that solves for a specific function or a specific problem with very limited coding and almost no coding required. And this uses the Microsoft connectors, it uses the Power Platform connectors, and it uses the orchestration that is native to Copilot Studio. However, you can go to the Pro Code model and still be deploying through Copilot Studio, through the Agent Kit or M365 Agents SDK. Pro Code doesn't automatically mean Foundry. However, you might want to go the Pro Code route depending on your developer capabilities and whether your maker is actually a developer or not. This hybrid area is useful when you want to use Copilot Studio topic orchestration, for example, as well as use its native premium connectors, like the pre-built capabilities that is there. And you don't necessarily need to build everything from scratch in Foundry. And then lastly, Foundry is going to be when you need custom models, you need custom retrieval, you need capabilities that don't exist in Copilot Studio, or you need to extend some of the Copilot Studio capabilities by deploying specific workloads within Foundry. So not everything that is pro code requires Foundry. However, you can get there depending on the complexity of the topic that you're trying to solve. And then gate number 5 is autonomy. And I'm gonna, again, refer back to the reactive, delegated, and autonomous. You don't always have to think about an AI capability as an agent that answers input or question. This is just the reactive piece. It can also be delegated either by a human trigger or by an autonomous trigger. And it can be always on, which is proactive, scheduled. And again, you'll notice here that I use agent and automation interchangeably because not everything requires an agent and not everything can be solved with a deterministic workflow. However, just know that as you go through with your system design, you gotta think about more than just chatbots. A very easy pitfall that people think of is like it has to be triggered by a chat or it has to be triggered by a very specific action, such as a new file is added. That is not necessarily always the case. You can build complex orchestrations. It just depends on what the level of autonomy that you're comfortable with requires. Now, another good best practice is always try to stick to human in the loop design. There were a couple of sessions in our previous workshop day on that, but human in the loop workflows are the easiest to actually manage, maintain, and design the ROI case for, rather than fully autonomous that carries inherent risk as you go through whatever workload or payload that you're trying to get to. Now, lastly, and this is important, everybody doesn't have an infinite budget. We all wish we did, but we do not. So you gotta do a cost modeling and budget analysis as you're building. It cannot come after you build it. Some of the estimates that you're gonna build are gonna tell you which workload to place on which surface. And some of these estimates might tell you that this is a no-go problem from the get-go. So there are multiple ways that you can do this. In the slides, I have a link to the Copilot agent usage estimator. But one of the main things that I'd like you to think about is when you are designing an agent, make sure that you treat it as an agent with a budget. It is not open, and volume should not mean automatically scaling your budget. You should check where the value is and where the ROI is, and then cap that and try to build an ROI case for your agent in the very beginning rather than trying to default to it at the very end. And then if it is not clear when you reach the last piece of the cost model and budget, that means that you have some unknowns in one of the previous gates that you're not really sure about. A very classic example of that is scope creep. And this happens to AI projects similar to software engineering projects, where to truly realize the value that the thesis statement had, you have to add a lot of additional capability. And everything you add is going to add more complexity, is going to add more credit consumption. For the Copilot credits, you can buy the message packs. I have one of the slides. I'll show you guys what that looks like. But it is there are multiple ways you can do it other than the pay-go. One of them is you buy a message pack for a month. It's about 25,000 Copilot credits or Copilot messages. And then it doesn't roll over. However, it's about 20% cheaper. It's like 0.008 cents rather than 1 cent per credit. All right. So we talked about when we want to build an agent and how we want to go through the complexity. But one of the things that you also have to consider is the composition of the solution that you are trying to design. Composition is a spectrum, multi-agents, and all of those, I built a swarm of agents that does all of these different things. While it does sound cool on paper and it may solve a problem, it is also very expensive. I always recommend to start with just stay within a single agent. It's one intent, one task, one domain, or one owner. You want to group the tools and the knowledge to limit it to that specific agent scope. And you don't want to add additional orchestration or no extra connected capabilities. You should start with that and then gradually move forward. that has to be a design decision. It cannot be, we're just going to do it because it sounds cool that we have an orchestrator agent and a bunch of other agents under it. One of the ways where you would need orchestration is when your agent starts having a lot of topics and a lot of tools and a lot of different happy paths that it can go through. One such example for that from what we built is we had a freight agent that helped answer questions about our major freight carriers. It started as a single agent, but as we started supporting more and more carriers, adding their knowledge, adding their APIs, and adding like SOPs for them, it started mixing carriers, it started hallucinating. That was the sign that we needed, okay, maybe we need to have multiple agents and an orchestrator where if somebody's asking a question about UPS, it goes to the UPS agent with all of its knowledge and tools and capabilities, and then the orchestrator synthesizes the response to give it back. All right, so I'm going to pause here, see if we have any questions in the chat. And we do not, so I will keep going forward. Okay, so there are three ways to compose an agent once you want to reach that orchestration layer. The cheapest one is that embedded child agent, which you can build from Copilot Studio, either within the agent or a different agent, Copilot Studio, and link it. But the embedded agent is always going to be the cheapest. It basically lives inside your parent. It is very specific in scope. It doesn't require separate deployment. This is great for that use case that I was talking about, which is I don't really need a lot of additional capabilities for those child agents. It's just to isolate the context so that I don't get context confusion or I don't get hallucinations while still maintaining the problem definition, which is I want to make sure that my people can get answers to questions about our freight carriers, right? Moving forward from this, connected agents are when you're trying to orchestrate a specific workflow and you have two things that are either different in domain or different in context that you want to connect. To put that into perspective, let's say I have a sales agent and that sales agent is supposed to also look at my marketing material and help come up with a PowerPoint presentation based on our brand guidelines, etc. Maybe I could put all of that marketing context within my sales agent, but at a certain point, that's not going to be helpful context. That's going to add a lot more complexity. So maybe I have a sales agent that I connect to my marketing agent. And then when the sales agent needs to build outgoing communication or a PowerPoint presentation or whatever it may be, it knows to reach out to the marketing agent, and the marketing agent has all of its capabilities. Copilot Studio supports A2A and MCP. And that is one way you can connect agents to each other. Now, the last piece is the open standard that everybody uses, which is MCP, and we can spend a lot of time talking about MCP, but agents don't really have to live within your Microsoft ecosystem or your tenant surface. They can also be agents that live on other ERPs or on other systems. And if you want to connect with them, MCP is always going to be the default for a lot of different reasons, but just know that as you add more of these capabilities, as it becomes more expensive. For MCP, for example, there is something called dynamic disclosure for tools, and that basically burns through a lot of credits before it does any job or any specific job. All right, so moving forward is we're going to switch from this composition and trying to orchestrate everything to maybe it can be deterministic with some AI in the middle. So here's an example that I like to call the ideal pattern, and that I always recommend that people test out. Basically, it's a deterministic workflow with some LLM node or component. I also like to say, think of it as a cake of AI and automation, etc. But the AI pieces are only the sprinkles on top. Everything else is deterministic. So the first step is going to be a trigger. Think of it as a new email arrives or a new file is created or a Teams message is sent. That deterministic trigger will look for a very specific email from a very specific sender. Then it's going to validate and route it. Again, it can be deterministic. Maybe if it's coming from my customer support agent, I route it here. If it's coming from my salesperson, I route it here. If it's coming from my HR, I route it there. And then the agent node is the only piece where I actually need some reasoning based on semantic context, basically where I need AI. Maybe there could be 500 different things that HR could need, and I can't logically capture all of that in one big if statement or one big switch statement. So this is where an agent might be helpful. It is grounded in whatever HR knowledge I have. It has its own system instructions and connected capabilities. And then I use that in order to figure out, okay, this is going to go to payroll. So the agent is going to take all of that unstructured input and then give me a deterministic output that I can use, which is basically going to be, let's say, payroll or employment law, whatever it may be. And then I can take that and use it in the rest of my deterministic flow. The modeling and the reasoning only happens in that one node. And it's the same pattern, regardless of where you build it. So you can build this in multiple different products. So you can build this in Power Automate and use the AI builder nodes. You can build this in Copilot Studio agent flows and have the agent trigger this workflow. You can also do mixing and matching. So you can call a Power Automate flow. This is a recent update. You can call a Power Automate flow from an agent, and you can do the vice versa. There's an execute agent node that is coming up where you can call an agent to do something from a Power Automate workflow. It's just a different architecture that depends on what needs you have. All right, so this is that exact capability that I was talking about. It's when the agent calls the flow trigger. There are some caveats that I put over here, and you have to be very careful about double dipping. When you use a different product in addition to Copilot Studio, that different product can also incur costs. So I'll start with something that doesn't incur cost and then move to something that does. So when the agent calls the flow, this is going to run in Copilot Studio. It's going to use Copilot Studio credits to do that deterministic workflow. If you call to a Power Automate flow that was created natively in Power Automate, and you pass certain input to it, then that also will cost you an action on Copilot Studio, but then it will also cost you whatever it costs you to run Power Automate workflows. Luckily, Power Automate licensing is a little bit simpler to understand. You get the $15 premium license. There are other licenses, but this is just the basic one. And then you can run the premium connectors and all of that. However, if we're going to call a different agent back to that composition piece, and let's say that different agent lives on Fabric or lives on Foundry, that is also going to consume Copilot Studio credits as well, whatever consumption it happens on that platform that the agent lives on. An example for that is if I have a Fabric data agent that lives on Fabric and I call it through a Copilot Studio agent, I'm going to pay for calling that agent on Copilot Studio. And then the Fabric data agent is going to consume Fabric capacity on Fabric as well. So you're basically paying for the consumption on both. Similarly with Azure, if you have an agent that lives on Azure and you call it through Copilot Studio, you're still paying for whatever Azure consumption is incurred. Okay. And then lastly, like the Power Automate flow that is calling an agent, let's say you need a premium license on a connector, so you're paying the $15 license for Power Automate, and then you call an agent, it's going to consume Copilot Studio credits. It's not going to be included in whatever AI Builder credits that you have out of Power Automate, and we'll talk about that because these are going away in November. All right, so here's an example from a sales proposal agent that we have. Is very similar to what I had discussed earlier, which is just one orchestrator, several agents. The problem was our market research team and our reps spent a lot of time assembling proposals. So the solution was basically you have an orchestrator that gets the context and sets it for that specific customer. And then it fetches the CRM data, which is Salesforce in our example, Dataverse for certain other items, as well as SharePoint. And then it basically validates it against the pricing and the policing. And at the end, it kicks off an approval flow, and that approval flow is fully deterministic. The market research person has to either approve or disapprove this. It can add, the person can add edits, and the model can basically refine some of the things. But this is just an example of a real pattern where you would need orchestration based on the complexity of how much context you're trying to go through. All right, now the cost of orchestration is that when you enable that generative orchestration on Copilot Studio, is each hop or each loop consumes credits and also adds latency. This is also another thing that can bite you, is if you have a lot of complex work that the agent has to do, from an end user perspective, if they're triggering this via chat, it will take some time for them to actually get a response. And then you also have to do a much larger test set. And when you're testing, you always got to remember that there will always be edge cases, and there's a lot of content that we can cover when it comes to agent testing. But one thing you should know is that every connected agent that you add also needs their own tests, as well as their own governance areas, and we'll talk about governance at the very end. But here is an example from the generative orchestration enablement based on what Microsoft is reporting, which is 20% better evaluation accuracy, because if you get a really good reasoning model, it can actually skip certain actions if it knows it can satisfy the work. And then in some cases, it can lower the net token use. However, you gotta make sure that you measure this against your own workload before you bank on it, because each added agent or each added topic or action adds multiple credit consumption pieces that basically can pile up. All right, so let's summarize all of these licensing talk with what you pay for based on each one of these services that we discussed. So Copilot Chat is free. Everybody has access to it as long as you're logged in with your work account, or depending on your license, you'll have that little green shield. It's free, people can use it, and it is fully trackable. And then for M365 Copilot, it's $30 per user per month. It's an additional user-specific license. However, know that there are prerequisites for it, so you need E3 or E5. Now, these licensing things change all the time, so if you're watching this recorded later on, just know this is from June 2026, and know that the pricing will depend on what your specific work has with your service provider. For M365 Copilot, you get a fixed cost, and you get unlimited M365 Copilot usage, subject to fair usage. You can build and share agents with other licensed users. However, there are certain limitations and usage rights that come. For the researcher and the analyst, it's the same exact thing. You have a certain limit of runs per month. And again, it's also subject to fair use. So just experiment with it, see if it fits. Copilot Studio, the maker licenses themselves, you don't need to pay additional for it. There are multiple ways you can get access to Copilot Studio. There is a trial license that you can start. However, there is also a Copilot Studio tenant license that happens when you buy a message pack. You could also do it as pay-go. There are multiple ways you can set up how you pay for this service, but just know that everything in Copilot Studio requires credits. There are certain caveats which we will cover, but in general, for big use cases that are org-wide, you're going to have to consume some sort of AI or Copilot credit. And then Cowork requires an M365 Copilot license to access. If you have not tested out, I encourage you to do. However, it is metered in Copilot credits, the same exact pool as the Copilot credits that is moving to be the default. It is enabled by the admin, and Microsoft released a lot of admin capabilities and controls on how you limit that spend, as well as some estimations. Again, the next month's session is going to be really good with Maddie. For Foundry, you need an Azure subscription, and then everything in Foundry is paid. Every single thing. There is no free lunch in Microsoft Foundry. GitHub Copilot, I mentioned it over here because it's a separate product, and the Copilot naming convention sometimes confuses people. It also has AI credits. They're completely different, though. They're not related to your M365 tenant. So if you see AI credits there and AI credits here, they're not interchangeable. AI credits and GitHub Copilot are just an approximation for dollar spend. AI credits in M365 are basically the currency that these products use, such as the Power Automate or the Copilot. Then we have Agent 365, and if you have not heard what Agent 365 is, it's the governance plane that Microsoft is adding on top of all of your admin capabilities. It spans Defender, Entra, Purview, as well as the M365 Admin Center. It is a separate add-on. It's for the people that manage, so like the AI admin role, but it's also included in the E7, which is the new license that was released. It's only for governance. It does not include any credits per se. Then we have Microsoft Scout, and in order to set up Scout, you need a Frontier license, you need Intune enabled, you need an M365 Copilot and a GitHub Copilot. It is in preview, so we do not know how that is gonna be priced. And then lastly, Power Automate, there are per user, per flow, premium and custom connectors. Again, you have like a $15 a month license, or give or take, depending on the current pricing. And the one important caveat is if your deterministic flow is built in Copilot Studio, it pulls usage from Copilot Studio. It does not get included under your Power Automate license. I put a link to the licensing guide, and licensing is super fun, I know, so I'm gonna quickly move from this and just show you a very quick example of Copilot credits. This is the pricing for the capacity pack. This is how it looks like with pay-as-you-go. There's a third option where you can buy it annually. I would not recommend you do this unless you know for a fact that you have specific consumption patterns. So start with either the pay-go or the capacity pack, and then move on to the annual commitment if it warrants. Here's the classic example of, just because it says it's a credit doesn't mean that it consumes 1 credit per run. So if you have an agent taking an action, it's going to be 5. Tenant graph grounding is 10, except if you have an M365 Copilot license. And then reasoning can be about 100 per 10 reasoning responses. There's a lot that goes into the Copilot Studio billing. And there's a lot that goes into how you estimate your agent usage. In one of the links, I have the agent usage estimator, which asks you questions about the number of users, actions, topics, knowledge, connectors, all of that, and comes up with an estimate. And we can talk about licensing for Copilot Studio for a long time. So the last piece that I want to talk about from a licensing perspective is, know that if you're going to start deploying M365 Copilot, it's quickly going to add up in cost, because it's not just the $30 per user per month like premium add-on, but it is also the E3 or E5 if they did not have it before. So if we assume E3, and again, use the latest licensing that you have for M365 Copilot, 100 users, that's about 6,600 per month. So you need to have a clear justification for what that is. Pay-go credits are a completely different thing, and I put a call out over here because there are certain capabilities that you can run as pay-go, but know that this pay-go is added on top of everything else. And then if you are connecting to a different AI capability elsewhere, know that it may have its own terms and conditions. So for example, if you're using Salesforce AI capability and you're calling it through Copilot Studio with an MCP connection, it will consume in Copilot Studio credits. Salesforce on its side will consume whatever it consumes and whatever the consumption model is over there. So let's talk about economics, and for the working in economics of 3 different models. The first one is just you're looking something in the graph. If you're doing it through M365 Copilot or a declarative agent built through M365 Copilot, it's basically going to be 0. However, it can go up if an unlicensed user is trying to use a Copilot Studio agent. There is a lot of worked example and credit rates in a Microsoft Learn document that I did, and I put it under there. And then if it's an external facing agent or a specific agent, some of these examples are about $38 per day per one agent. Again, these are just illustrative figures. It really depends on what you have. And then for co-work power users, if you were using co-work in Frontier before GA, as soon as GA hit, you started seeing all the different consumption patterns that people had. You can probably try to guess who are the power users that you have. But remember, if you enable it, it's going to use the Copilot credits, which is about 1 cent. Again, that it 0.08 cent or 1 cent, depending on what you have. These are all illustrative. I see Stephen had a question of taking the organization licensing selections into account. I do not know of something like that. I'm pretty sure you can build your own pretty quickly using any of the AI code generation because it will just be taking that base model and adding some of your estimates or some of your specifics for your organization. All right. So the one line I want you to remember over here is that the cost is driven by the architecture, composition, and autonomy. It's not the seat count. There is a caveat. There's a little asterisk for the seat count for M365 Copilot Declarative Agent. However, just know that a same agent can be really good in one agent surface, and it can be a non-starter in another. An example of that is using something that sifts through a lot of content within AI Builder that will run you quickly out of AI Builder credits in Power Automate. However, it may be a lot cheaper to do it within a Copilot Studio agent, depending on what kind of content that you're sifting through. All right, so justifying an agent, make sure that you are getting at least 2 to 3x of that $30 per user per month, because you have to consider the minimum of E3 or E5 prerequisite. And then make sure that if somebody is only using the Teams Intelligent Recap, they don't really need a full M365 Copilot. This is something that we've noticed in my organization, which is sometimes they may just need a Teams Premium, which includes that AI recap, because the only time that they actually use M365 Copilot was the web chat as well as the intelligent recap. So you can get away with a Teams Premium, which is, I think, like less than half the cost of an M365 Copilot license. I also linked a study about the total economic impact through Forrester for M365 Copilot, and its finding was it's $9 9 hours per user per month. So that 9 hours can then be roughly translated into dollars for your ROI. So you can come up with an estimate. For simplification for this call, we can just say, hey, if a worker's hour is worth about $30, so 9 hours per user per month, that is a very easy sell. It's a 9-to-1 ROI, right? And then know that there are multiple GLs that are completely separate from all of these. So somebody could own the Azure, but someone else could own the M365 or the Power Platform licensing or the GitHub. All of these, if you do not have good FinOps or DevSec FinOps practices, you're not really going to be able to see that full cost until every invoice arrives. I also linked M365 Maps for license comparison. This is one of my favorite sites for actually comparing M365 licensing. So be sure to check that out if you haven't. It's really nice. All right, so let's talk about monitoring and optimization. Is when you buy the seats, like that's really the start of it. You can't just say, oh, we are giving everybody an M365 Copilot license, or some people a premium license, and then they're going to do great. You got to monitor. You have your Copilot dashboard. You have the consumption analytics that are available through reporting on the M365 Admin Center, and you can access it through the Copilot specific tab or through the reports section. You can also do license rotation, which we always recommend. Some of the licenses, you can buy them on an annual basis, and then you can rotate and reassign them depending on the usage. And then make sure that you right size your SKUs. We talked about the Teams Premium. Make sure you only leave the M365 Copilot licenses for the true heavy users, and you can define your thresholds for what heavy usage means. And I added the links to the Learn articles on the Copilot dashboard, as well as the Admin Center for specifically the Copilot reports. All right, and then on the use cases piece, remember that just because it is facing internal employees does not mean it's free. Classic answers cost 1 credit, generative cost 2. With M365 premium licenses, you can have some zero costs, but know that you still have to consume some form of credits, and you can monitor that through the Power Platform Admin Center. Know that the premium connectors are going to require a Power Platform Premium or a premium license somewhere. Azure resources that the agent calls are going to be built on Azure. The fair usage ceiling is undefined for certain SKUs and certain capabilities with the M365 Copilot license. Work IQ grounding is going to start using credits in July 1st, but there is still some ambiguity over there, so this is an evolving situation. And then know that even if everything is included and accounting for, you still have to build, test, and govern all of these solutions, regardless of what they are. And then the last caveat that I have over here is that if you are trying to build an agent that basically just answers questions based on what you have within the M365 tenant information, then you can build a declarative agent. It's cheap. It's not really going to be that transformational piece that you want or that your leadership is going to ask for. Specificity is where the cost is going to live as well as the value. And you just got to be picky about your use cases. And then here's a real example. This is from the Microsoft customer stories. Again, very useful to see what all of the other companies are doing. The first one is for computer use agents. And I chose this one specifically because computer use agents, if you have not heard about them, they're a completely separate capability. They are using credits at the moment. However, you need additional licensing with them. This example is just to illustrate that there's always going to be caveats. So take everything over here with a grain of salt. This is just to give you a quick overview of everything. And then for Coca-Cola, like the customer reference that is there talks about how they deploy Copilot Studio agents to answer questions, etc. And then here is the use cases and the archetypes that you can identify and think about. So if you're doing an internal lookup, that's Copilot Studio, that's a business to employee. Think about how M365 Copilot basically enables this, and you don't really have to build anything specific. If you're going to build a specific internal agent, then you might need to add some additional knowledge sources or connectors. Then the conversation can increase in cost plus premium license. And then you can justify by if it's faster to get a ticket done, how many licenses do you need, etc. If you're going to do something external facing, it has to be Copilot Studio governed. If you're going low code, obviously you can go pro code. However, you gotta know that there's not going to be any free lane, and you gotta have a ceiling for how much this is going to cost, and you gotta have continuous monitoring and logging in case that there are any abuse or anybody's trying to short circuit the system. If you're doing unstructured input automation, you can do Copilot Studio with some reasoning. You could also use computer using agents, and computer using agents is basically you give the LLM access to a browser or a machine. Additional licensing might be required for that machine part, but know that there are certain use cases that work really well for computer using agents. Think legacy ERPs or legacy sites that don't have an API that you are trying to basically automate something with. Complex one-off knowledge work is going to be co-work. This is where the industry is going, whether it's the Microsoft Cloud or ChatGPT. They're wanting to go into the co-work model. Again, for Microsoft, it's $0.01 per credit, and it's one credit based on a very specific calculation. You're never going to know really how much it's going to cost on average until you start using it. So again, next month's session is going to be really good. GitHub Copilot depends on the SKU that you have. There's $19 and $39 depending on the license. However, this is mainly toward coding. And then lastly, Foundry is where everything is paid. However, everything is customizable, and you only will go there if you have a true differentiator. Now, here is some financial controls that I'd like to leave you with at the end. Set per agent capacity limits, as we discussed. Make sure that you don't add all the context in the whole wide world. Just give it the grounding that it needs to actually solve the problem. Make sure if you have high volume FAQ, if everybody's asking, where's my order, where's my order, where's my order, you might not need a lot of Copilot Studio power behind this. You can route them to, hey, track your using the tracking number through here, or give them something else. review the consumption analytics on a weekly/monthly basis. And the main reason I say that is look at each week on its own, as well as look at a month, so that you can figure out where you have some misconfigurations, and you will always deploying the agent as the start. And then make sure that if you're deploying an agent for a specific team, make sure that their budget goes back to that specific team. Because again, trial licenses put a lot of misconception on what can actually be done for free. And then set spend alert hard caps. This is just general best practice for any cloud spend. And then routing agents into the right environment is going to be something that is necessary once you're trying to do a whole organizational transformation. The default environment is the worst place to build things. If anybody is a Power Platform admin, you know that. And then lastly, make sure that if you are going to split a budget, such as a prepaid consumption pack, is you limit different environments to different levels of AI credit consumption, so that no agent can just run away and drain the whole message pack for you. All right, and here's the easiest levers are the placement and the composition, where you put your quote unquote agent or AI capability and how complex it is. It's going to make it easy for you. Deterministic, always go to Power Automate. Even if it's a deterministic system that has AI in it, my first hunch is always going to be to go to Power Automate. Licensed internal, try to do M365 Copilot premium licenses. And then anything that is external or reasoning heavy, make sure it's metered and make sure that you have the ROI justified before you build it. Managed environment are really good. However, that's a whole other session that we can talk about. But then lastly, make sure to not have an agent be super complex. One domain per agent. Don't try to build the all-knowing, all-powerful agent that can do everything. On the governance piece, Agent 365 and Entra ID are coming. You're going to have a lot of shadow agents that start popping up into your organization. Floor for Agent 365 is the published $15 per user per month. But this, again, helps you track all the different shadow AI that exist. And there's even a specific tab for it in the M365 Admin Center. The takeaway, this is the one pager. This just covers the 6 stages that we have, as well as 4 anti-patterns. So the first anti-pattern is you throw everything in an agent. Sometimes a workflow with an AI builder can work. If you try to go to something that is super complex, either by over-engineering or just using premium capabilities that you don't really need, that's always going to be a trap. And then lastly, if you solve a problem that nobody cares about, that's basically gonna run you into the ground pretty quickly, and you'd be surprised how easy it is to solve problems that people don't really care about, or at least business and leadership don't really care about. So recap, this is really for you guys as a summary. It's just when to choose which surface, a practical example, as well as why here and not lighter or heavier. This just covers everything that we have talked about. And again, this part is just the lightweight. You're talking Power Automate, you're talking the M365 Copilot, Agent Builder, and Copilot Studio. These are the low-code to no-code that are more geared towards makers. And then the second piece is going to talk about the heavier pro-code or autonomous capabilities, where you should only allow these for the either the devs or the more power user-oriented individuals. And then here's the closing slide that I have is not everything needs an agent. Just choose the easiest thing that you can build that is very simple and very easy to govern. If you can draw the flow chart, just build the flow chart, or give the agent the one step that it cannot fit the workflow or the flow chart. A lot of the business problems that you face can be easily visualized with a flow chart. And then start declarative and simple. Reach for pro code or any additional layer only when the work demands it. Remember, it just doesn't have to be an agent. And thank you very much.
That was awesome, Ahmed. Thank you so much. I think there's going to be questions. Robert, you've got a question? Raise your hand.
Go ahead.
You should be able to come off mute. Yeah. Oh, clicked the wrong button. Okay, no problem. Yeah, Chris, do you want to ask that question?
Well, I think I try to spell it out as simplistically as possible in the chat. A lot of great information. Thank you, Ahmed. Fantastic presentation. Have you built a tool that operationalizes this? Go and look at, I plug it into my tenant and will give me recommendations. I think that was in the chat. Stephen kind of alluded to that too. There's a lot of data points here, I know, but curious if something like that's popped in your head and if you got something in the works.
Yeah, I would apply the same principle that I was just saying. What is the simplest, easiest thing that you can use right now that can basically reference unstructured data, try to grab additional recommendations? And for me, that's going to be free M365 Copilot chat, basically, or any LLM, depending on what you like. You throw this presentation into it, you tell it, here's what I'm trying to do, and you start adding more context about your tenant. The more complex you want it to be, then you can start adding more capabilities. So you can move it to a premium M365 Copilot where it follows your admin policies, etc. And then you can have additional pieces on if you want to have it run API calls to the Graph API to grab certain how many licenses you have, etc. Then you can rise up the rank and add more complexity. But that's how I would do it. Just throw it in an LLM and ask it, hey, I'm trying to do this. Will help walk me through what I can start doing.
Perfect. So just take the recording of this presentation, throw it into Clipchamp, and then have it pump out to Copilot, really, to build the tool.
Yep. Easiest way to start.
Great advice.
I love it. I think this is where many of us, as we think of the next 12 months, how do we control it? How do we help advise all the end users that are saying, hey, I want to bring this agent, I want to build this agent, I got to get into this knowledge source. I want to be, I want to start thinking about parent-child agents. This is fantastic. I think this is really where a lot of people are at, is like which tool when, and how do we put safeguards in place, and then how do we advise? That's a huge part of this. So this is so perfect timing. Let's see, it looks like, is it Gatima? Let's see. Let me see, you popped up so fast.
Gatima. Yeah.
Oh, Gatima, yes.
Yeah, so Ahmed, I have two questions. I am a Power Platform admin, and one of the issues that we are encountering right now, especially coming from financial institution, is users with M365 licenses are able to create agents in default environments. And we have no proactive way of kind of having them before they create that agent to redirect them to the right approval process. And so what right now we're doing is reactive governance. So is there a way that we can kind of prevent users, especially, when we are talking about data that is highly sensitive, we do not want any autonomous agents to have access to that without the right approval route?
Thank you. Like two really good questions. So the first one is hey, how do we stop people from creating agents on the default environments? The two controls for that. The first one is disable the viral trial license. So every tenant has those viral licenses, and everybody that navigates to Copilot Studio, the Microsoft.com, will be prompted, start a trial. As soon as they start a trial, they can start deploying. And then the second piece is environment routing. So from the new Power Platform Admin Center, you can actually make sure that you force them to go to their personal dev environment where the scope is going to be limited. These two controls are going to help contain the problem. However, you cannot limit people outside of the default environment. This is just not how it works. Like as soon as the permissions refresh next day, even if you remove everybody, they're gonna get access to it again. So what you can do is make sure that no Copilot credits are assigned to the default environment. This way, they're not gonna be able to use it. And then there is the Copilot Studio authors security group that you can add, that basically, if you don't have a trial license and if you're not part of that, if they go to Copilot Studio, they're not going to be able to build anything. So that's the part on the containment for the default environment. Does that answer your question?
Partly, because we're still trying to look at those permissions and see where we can remove. One of the things, and I had raised a ticket on Microsoft for this, and one of the suggestions that were made was to, because we have nothing assigned on, we call it personal productivity environment, which is the default environment. We have no credits allotted for that environment. So what the users are doing, or what the agent that is being created, is basically pulling, it's called drawing credits from the tenant, right?
Yes.
And so I was able to disable those. I mean, that we have so many environments that there's no PowerShell script for that, but manually I was able to do it for the default environment. It looks like, because I don't know if it takes a little bit of time to reflect, because I disabled it on Friday, but it looks like on Saturday somebody was able to create an agent. Now I don't know if creating an agent consumes credits, or it's when they're running that specific agent that the credit is consumed. So
When they're
again,
running it and publishing it, and yep, like that is the control that I had mentioned, which is make sure that you don't assign any credits to the default environment, as well as disabling the setting that allows other environments to use unconsumed AI credits is a really good call. But again, that means that you do have tenant licenses. And then on the DLP piece of like when you don't want them to get access to that specific piece of information or data, that's more of an oversharing problem, and you can do that through SharePoint Advanced Management or some of the SharePoint reporting on where things are being hit. However, that can be a completely different topic that we can go into how to make sure which knowledge is surfaceable through all the AI tools. But feel free to reach out, and happy to discuss that. Just want to be mindful of the time.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
So I will share the slides. Michelle, I'll give it back to you for our next speaker. And thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much again. I think this was an excellent session, excellent topic.